Hi, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of Carolyn Talks. For those who here's what happened podcast, I am your host, Carolyn Hines, and this is the podcast or the YouTube channel, as I like to say sometimes, where I talk to film creators about their work and their art and what inspires them. And today I am joined by writer and filmmaker Carlo Francisco Manatad to discuss his film Whether the Weather is Fine, which screened at the 2021 Toronto International Film Festival. And before we get into this absolutely mind-bending film, I'm going to ask Carlo to say a bit about himself and about the film, and then we'll get into it. So, Carlo?
Hi everyone. Thank you, Caroline, for having me in your program. My name is Carlo Francisco Manatad. I hail from the Philippines. I'm a filmmaker. I've been doing shorts for quite a long time, but I went into filmmaking as an editor and then shifted to directing. Whether the Weather is Fine is actually my first feature. So yeah,
Yes.
let's talk more.
So first of all, congrats on your first featured film, because making a feature film is a completely different beast to making short films, which you've been doing before. And I just have to congratulate you on that, especially for one that I think is as unique as I've seen. I think I was telling a friend, I think apart from Terrorizers, your film is the most unique film that I've seen for the festival and possibly for the year so far.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I this film, so Whether the Weather is Fine is about the aftermath of Typhoon Haiyan, which hit the Philippines in 2013, and that was a devastating typhoon across Southeast Asia. And the thing is, when we're watching a lot of news coverage, a lot of it does sensationalize the storms. Or even when we watch films, like there would have been films like Twister, or a lot of these disaster films. It talks about the storms and the hurricanes and like typhoons and tsunamis as characters themselves, and a lot of the focus is actually placed on those than the people. And your film is one of the few that I've seen that actually talks about the emotional and mental toll that happens just after, like where everything is still in disarray, everything is still destroyed. So can you just talk a bit about using this film as a way to shine a light on how the typhoon affected the people of the Philippines?
I think more than anything, I mean, going back to the fact that I've been watching all these like films about tragedy or like calamities or whatsoever. I think what's more important to state is that with this film, that's why I wanted to shed light on how the people are rather than the bigness of the devastation. More than anything, it's actually personal to me. I am born and raised in Tacloban, and I actually experienced the aftermath of the storm. So in essence, I really wanted to portray how I felt during that time, or how people felt, the people that I met, the people that I did not met because they died, friends and family. So, and meaning to say, I didn't want to have this bigness of, just because it's a post tragedy storm doesn't have to say like this should be the story taken into a melodramatic context. I felt lots of things during that time, came upon with emotions that I felt like it was really absurd. Sometimes maybe people, when you watch, it felt really weird, but mainly speaking, everything was actually based on things that I actually noticed during that time. So I wanted to be in a different context so that people could more focus on the journey of the people trying to survive this dog eat dog world. But more importantly, I also wanted to push forth that the survival is also a celebration of hope, of things that, of freedom and whatsoever. Yeah.
Mhm. Right. So you use the word absurd, and that was actually one of the words that I used to describe the film itself. I said it was absurd and it was compelling and it's surreal. It's very surreal because things happen and it's like you're wondering if Miguel, the lead character played by Daniel Padilla, if a lot of the things he's seeing, if they're happening, because it's like he reacts to some things that other people around him don't react to. Like there's this thing with a, and I'm like, is he the only person seeing this pig? And I know for sure Andrea didn't see this pig, because if she did, she would have killed it and used it for food. And so like there's so there's a lot of things like that that make it surreal, and you wonder, and it feels like Miguel is existing in this bubble. And then it's when you really think about it, that's how, like as you say, like people who do go through traumatic events, like they're feeling like they're existing within a bubble themselves, because everyone is going about doing their own thing, whether they're dealing with the same traumatic event, but they're experiencing it individually. And that's what this film is about a lot, because like when you do go through, whether it's a natural disaster or death or anything like that, it does feel absurd. It does, you're wondering like, how is this happening? How is this possible? Like, what am I supposed to do now? And I think your film conveys that in a very, 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 very specific way, in that it does make it's not about glamorizing the event. It's about just showing this is an absurd thing, like a typhoon, for goodness sakes, just like decimating your whole life. That's ridiculous. That's absurd. That's something
Yeah,
that shouldn't happen, but it does.
no, you know what? Like, I'd just like to add, like, when you're actually placed in a situation like this, reality and absurdity actually mix. Like, you're not even actually ready to take in what you're seeing or what you're experiencing. And that's how I felt what the characters were actually feeling. And it's good to note that you mentioned that Miguel is living in this bubble within the time frame of the aftermath of the typhoon, because even before the typhoon, you could feel that he's been living in his bubble from within the surface of his mother.
Mhm.
And up until how, like all these things going into him experiencing this, looking at this, having had a lot of people go into him. I think it's mainly the point where you just explode. I mean, I don't want to spoil the film, but like there are things that makes you think and makes you contemplate, but if it's just too much, then it's just there.
Mm.
And that's how I felt the journey of Miguel have been. He's been trapped in this situation, not even because of the storm, but in a more familiar structure. And then everything just blows.
Yeah, and the film does look like an explosion happened. But the way it is, like these three characters, because it's Miguel, Andrea, and then his mother Norma, played by Charo Santos, and there are these three characters again, like exist within their own bubble, but they're together and they're kind of moving around each other, kind of like I was thinking like planets, how planets kind of revolve around each
Yeah,
other.
yeah, yeah.
And then the world just exploded around them. And I want to talk about I'm going to get into the characters more, but I want to go a bit from what you're talking about, the explosion, because your set design, like your production crew did a fantastic job with this film, because it feels so real. It feels like you filmed this right after the typhoon, and it does look like everything just exploded outward from these characters. I want you to talk a bit about just like creating this world that, so I think so realistically, because it's kind of offsetting, because you're just
Mm.
like, every time I saw them walking, like I was like, I know paling, like I see rusty paling. I know you don't want to get cut by paling. I'm from the Caribbean, I'm from Barbados, so like I know
Yeah,
what
yeah.
rusty paling looks like. And I was just like, I swear to God, I hope nobody gets lockjaw walking through this dirty water. I want like around these rusty things, because that is not a fun thing to have.
Yeah, I wanted to share also because I mean, more than the film in itself, like elements of the film has been, especially production design, has been a feat to actually do, because like the storm has passed like 7 years ago, almost eight actually. And shooting this film right now, we couldn't shoot in real locations. Even if we did, all the locations that supposedly I wanted to shoot were already like, it's already normal looking, as if nothing actually happened. So the design in terms of like the planning, so what you see in the whole film is basically based from real photos, referencing my hometown. So what we planned was to make it as much as authentic as possible. So we had like how to say, archival photos, and even photos that I took when I was actually trying to find my family during that time. For it wasn't in my head to actually make a film about the storm, but it was more of like me documenting the journey. So when I was planning with my production designer, I showed him the photos. More importantly, I wanted to make it feel as authentic as possible, mainly because we weren't shooting at the real place, at my real hometown. Like only 40% were done there. But at the same time, if you notice, but this is more detail, it feels authentic, but also you have little details there that makes it much more magical in a sense. Like even it looks real, but it's blocked in a way that the colors pop out. Mainly to say that I feel a lot of films pertaining to tragedy, it's always something that makes you feel that it makes you feel really low, makes you feel sad or whatsoever. And I do feel like in general, because maybe you haven't really seen something of this kind, but it could actually happen. You could actually see this. It's just that it's not presented at this moment in terms of like films that have been done. So I wanted it to have a very real approach, but at the same time, very specific details that you cannot actually see if it's your first viewing. So I wanted this to have like a conversation in terms of like the details of things that supposedly you feel it's real, but really it has more into it.
Yeah, I think you and your team did a fantastic job conveying that because I think there's a difference where you have these kind of like talking about disaster films, because technically that is what your film is, where they're made by people who like read about events or just like have like, you know, theoretical knowledge about hurricanes or tsunamis
Yeah.
or tornadoes. Whereas you have like someone like yourself who lived through the experience and who's from that environment, you know exactly what it looks like. You know the colors aren't washed out just because the
Yeah,
storm has
actually, I wanted to add also like
yes.
mainly also because there's this feeling of me being responsible for telling this kind of story mainly because I came from there, and there's this thin line. I mean, this film is real and at the same time absurd, but there's also this thin line of exploitation, exploiting the fact of like this is based on a real story. So I had this fear and like I want trying to balance out, and sometimes you I question myself like up a certain degree, where do I place myself in the kind of cinema that I do? But more importantly, I felt I was trying to do a more authentic and sincere way of telling the story. It's just seen in a different light. So it's always questions, and I'm always honest about it. Yeah.
No, I think that's great because you are supposed to question yourself, and especially when you are dealing with events that did happen and people did die, and like they would have been severe mental and emotional and physical for anyone who would have been injured, consequences because of this. So it's good that you question yourself, and it's good that you second guess any decision, because if you didn't, that would actually, I think, make you a bad creator and a bad director, because then you're just going forward and doing your own thing. You're not considering the possible fallout, which is important. That's to me a part, the responsibility that creators play a role in creating. Like, you should consider how your audience could feel watching this, right? So you, and like,
Yeah.
I, to me personally, in my opinion, I don't think you exploit what happened, because what you do, so I think, so brilliantly with this film is you show the emotional toll of it. Like, that's where a lot of the focus of the film is. It's about Miguel, it's about his mother, it's about Andre, it's about showing these three individuals are experiencing this event in very different ways, and it's about them and the setting. And I think, if, like, forgive me for saying this, if you were to remove the story of the typhoon, I think this would still make a fantastic dramatic film about the relationship between these three people, because like between Miguel and Nora, you have the relationship of a mother and a son who are struggling, and there's clear resentment between them because she is focused on her husband Louis, who's long gone off to marry and live a life, and she's still thinking about him. Or her son is like, I'm right here, I need you to pay
Mm,
attention to me, and she's not, she's wandering off doing her
mm,
own thing, like making him, this is something I want to get into because that scene was a lot, making him injure her so she could get into the Astrodome to see a man who isn't even there, because she took the
there,
word of a
exactly.
child that she doesn't know. So I think you did a fantastic job, like making sure that the story is about these characters themselves.
Yeah, because with I mean like with films like these, it's always like these the bigness of the tragedy, and mainly this film, and that is also true. A goal that I really wanted to do was like, if you take this storm out, it's still a story, it's still the core, and that's why I think the film connects with people that watch, because even though the storm is cultural specific, the core is very universal. It's a story about mother and son. It's a story about hope. It's actually a story about love. It's a story about freedom or the lack of it. So yeah, it's nice to hear that you see this from a perspective of how you did when watching the film.
Yeah, no, I love the way you tell the story because I'm a very visual person. So I love when directors, like I was telling another director this, I love when directors put little visual cues about the film and about the characters in the story. You do that like right from the beginning. Like with one of the, I think one of my favorite kind of Easter eggs is the shirt that Miguel is wearing at the beginning, where it says paradise, and it says it's like a reference to the Wizard of Oz. And I was like, I love this because, like, I told Steve, and I said, this is like, I would describe this film as a deconstructed Wizard of Oz, and that's exactly the feeling of this film. That's what this film gave me, and like the first clue is that shirt, and like there's different things that they do, like they keep changing their clothes, and I kind of
Yeah,
saw that as I'm like, and then at the end, I realized all of this is happening in the day,
Yeah.
And like there every time they changed their clothes, that was actually a cue that something different was happening with the characters. Like their story was progressing differently, and the sky starts to
Yes.
change very slowly. And there's
Yeah.
this talk of the approaching storm, and like
Yeah.
like your VFX team did a fantastic job actually grading the sky to fit the moods
Um,
of the characters, especially right to
yeah.
the end. So I want to talk a bit about that, about these visual cues that you put into the film, because there's the shirts that the things, the clothes that keep changing. Then there's the
Yeah.
animals like the chicken and the pig and the
Yeah.
dog. And these kids, these random kids appearing dressed up as fairies, and then some singing Christmas carols because it happened in December. It happened around
Yeah.
Christmas.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
want you to talk a bit about that before we get into the characters a bit.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like these elements that you talked about are actually elements that I felt was very apparent when I was experiencing the search for my family. I feel like, for example, the animals. It was actually a joke because like I felt like during that time there was a political person in my hometown who owns a zoo, as a mini zoo to say the least. And I was thinking, what happened to them during the typhoon? Maybe they're just there. But in a way, in a more bigger perspective approach, the film, I hearkened it to Noah's Ark,
Yeah,
where yeah, no, seriously, where like people starts to like just exodus for survival, and I just feel like it doesn't have to be just human beings, it's everyone trying to get survival. And that also at the same time you see all these animals roaming around, but they don't really attack people or whatsoever. I just feel like in this time, during this whole thing that's happening, it's actually the humans who are more animalistic in approach, more violent in essence. Like animals are just there. The lion is on top of something, not doing anything.
I love that
Maybe
line. He's
waiting
so
for the
random.
maybe maybe waiting for like the boat to come. We don't know. But that's my point. It's like coexisting, but at the same time, their differences are in a way like subdued to the point that the humans are much more in a way animalistic. Also I had this thing that in a way at this very moment the adults are the one who actually could not think straight, and like kids are the more aggressive and innocent ones, and they're the ones who actually could have a plan in such a way. I'd like to share like there was one time I was roaming around the rubbles of the storm, and like I was asking a few people where to go. I mean, I know the place geographically, but when I was there I was like lost, and then I couldn't get a right answer from these adults. And then I asked a kid, "Oh, you go there, it's this place, blah blah blah." And I'm like, how in the world are like these kids know more things and more factual things than the ones that, and the other adults are just concerned about surviving to the point that they really become violent. Yeah, those things of elements, and even in terms of like how the visuals were composed, more than anything, it's a mixed bag of all these tones, but in a way I try to balance. If you've noticed, there are a lot of found footage in the film,
Yes.
and these found footage are actually, it wasn't mounted, they're really found footage in a way of the actors. So if you notice, there's this part where Miguel and Andrea were biking and they were talking about dreams and whatsoever. Before that, there was like a found footage of a little kid trying to steal the microphone from her dad because she really wanted to sing. It's actually a video of the actress from years ago. So
Oh,
I
okay.
actually, yeah, I actually asked like old videos and photos from my actors, and I scrubbed through everything to make it in a way it's not just about the characters they portray, but also in a way it it becomes meta in a sense where the actors are actually also part of the film. More than it, I think I'm really proud of them being part of this. It's not because they're just actors portraying the film, but they actually understood the film and the intention of what it wants to say. So yeah.
Actually, there's some things that you mentioned that I also wanted to talk about. Like you talk about Noah's Art, which I think is very fascinating because the Philippines is very has a very religious culture. A lot of it is either Protestant,
True.
Christian, or Catholic, and like that is in the film a lot. And you talk about Noah's Art, and it kind of reminds me of those posters. I don't know if you guys would have had them, but back home, growing up in Sunday school, there were these posters that would always have, like Adam and Eve, who was always white and blonde, by the way. Not true. But you know, it'd be like Adam and Eve surrounded by the animals in the Garden of Eden. You know,
Yeah,
and the film kind of reminded me of that. It was like you have all these. You talk about coexistence, but it reminded me of those posters and like
yeah,
how we always talk about the vision of Eden and of God of heaven after you know
exactly, exactly.
the I don't want what's the word reclamation where people the human beings who are in heaven would be existing with animals peacefully. And the film was like that because you have the line on the Astrodome, which cracked me up, but then it kind of plays through in the sound design because their sound design is really interesting too, where you hear the animals like the lion growling or like a pig snorting or a dog barking. You're not seeing them, but you're hearing them as Miguel and Andrea are doing these
Journeys,
random things.
journey.
So they're always there. So I kind of like how you interject that. But then you talk about like using the found footage, and I thought it was really interesting because I think it serves to remind people that what we are seeing a dramatized version of an actual event, and it does, and I think it was important that you add those in because it shows that these characters are played by people who would have experienced it and who had family that experienced it. So that's kind of how I saw it, which I was like, don't get caught up in the story. Remember that this is still something that actually happened.
True, true, true. So it was a struggle, but also it was a nice process for me balancing out these things. Actually, just another factor that I really wanted to push, like the use of the score, the musical score, and even the use of the soundtrack, like the one where they danced to, the one where Andrea actually sang, like the finger song, the
That
ending
was so
song. It's
disconcerting. That song disturbed me. Like, get on Raz because she unsettled me. She felt threatening to me. I swear, like, I told a friend, I swear there was one moment I thought she was gonna hug me. Yeah, the next she would either stab him or shoot him. I was like, Raz did a
Yeah,
fantastic
like
job of like balancing this.
she's that she it's actually her first feature film.
She has a
This
promising future. Like,
uh,
I wouldn't buy her in a horror movie.
no,
She's
anyway, like that part where with all the music and all, it was not just a decision I made, but also more importantly, it was, and I didn't know about this. So the songs that I used are basically songs of local artists from my hometown. So that was one thing that I really wanted to consider. And then I realized, like, the song where they actually dance and at the Astrodome, the artist actually died during the typhoon.
oh.
Uh, and the other songs that we used were actually parts of like the artist were part of the survivors as well. So it was a very multi-layered usage of this oral element. And the use of music also, I wanted it to be in a very different sense where, if it's tragedy, it's always like dramatic and whatsoever, and I wanted it to be presented in such quirky way, seeing something that's really depressing, but at the same time, they experience this depressing thing, and then it happens to them, but they keep pushing. It's very resilient. I also wanted to play on how culture interjects with the film. I mean, you have noticed about the religion, but more importantly, culture, also pop culture, how it manages to like put everyone together in such a very absurd situation, aka the dancing, something like this.
Yeah, no, that worked. The pop culture I saw, especially with with Andrea, where she's singing at the end and she has her backup dancers. And I'm like, these backup dancers, first thing first, are not in time with what she's singing. But then she has like the plastic karaoke microphone. And I want to know, this is like the perfect segue to talk about these characters because Andrea, she has this dream of being a singer in a club, and that's
Yeah.
her dream. And then Miguel, he doesn't have a dream. Like there's this conversation that you talk about where they're talking about their dreams, and he's like, he doesn't know what he wants to be. And I want to talk about her I want to talk about the two women that in Miguel's life. There's Norma, and then there's Andrea. And Andrea, as I said, to me, gave me a very unsettled feeling because I was like, I don't know if she likes Miguel or she's just tolerating him, which I think is actually perfect because on the situation that's going on, Miguel doesn't seem to know what direction he's going in, like, like with regards to life and what's happening. And Andrea, she has a more definite thing. She's like, we have to survive. We have to get to the ship. And because he didn't want to go to the ship at first. He didn't want to go to Manila at first. He was like, I want to stay here. I want to find my mom. And she's like, no, we need to survive. But then as the film progresses, like their motivations start to actually flip. And I want
Mhm.
to talk about the two of them, and then I want to talk about Miguel and Norma, because like these two relationships with these two female characters in his life are very distinct and serve, I think, very different purposes. So I want to talk a bit about Andrea first. Tell me about her and tell me about casting rounds, because she like she was something else.
Yeah, I mean, like the character of Andrea is something very spunky, someone who actually dreams of something to the point that regardless of whatever it takes, she would do it. And if you don't help her with what she wants, then she just bye. She
Yeah.
just leaves. I mean, that's her main motivation, but also mainly we don't know the backstory, but she wants. There was this part where she really wants her father to be proud in a way. So and also her dreams of becoming this. When she's with Miguel, but Miguel doesn't give her this chance to actually achieve something or like go out of the club and perform or whatsoever. She just leaves. We actually don't know if she became like something of a saint or whatsoever, but she embraces it. She embraces the moment because this is what she needs. With Norma, I do feel like, I mean, it's a broken family, but at the same time, she feels that with this event, in this kind of event, a typhoon, maybe, maybe by this time, the typhoon would actually make her family together again. But that was also like in a way her delirium of some sorts. Like, why the hell do you think about this? Because like with Miguel, it was very, very clear to the point where no, there's nothing. We just leave. But for Norma, she holds on to the situation that maybe because of the storm, they'd be together again. And it comes to a point that um the storm actually make you, I don't know, it's the same feeling as me. It makes you do something that it's almost stupid or almost dumb, but because you have a certain thing that you look into it, then that's the thing you have to do. It's mainly the same as religion. Like during this time of a typhoon, of a tragedy, it's the only thing you can hold on to. Yeah, it keeps you, but it also breaks you. So it's a matter of choice, what you want and what you want to pursue. And you have Miguel, who's a character that has been in a way caged all his life by his mom, but at the same time he wants freedom from this cage. So I think with the typhoon it was also his way of like trying to break free or something, but at the same time he couldn't really decide on what to do because he has these two people in his life having different goals to expect. But I mean, at the end of it, like he chooses to have his own freedom, but does he actually have freedom? Something like
Mm.
that.
Yeah, Norma, I think her, to me, I read it as that her because of the typhoon, it's like her brain, she had a mental break. Like she wasn't able to process what was happening. So she kind of went back to the past, which I saw was done with the house. Like she found their house. And at first it was like, is this some stranger's home that she's just wandering in and just laying on this bed? But then we see the pictures and you realize it's their home. And it to some it would seem like an oasis in all of this disaster. It's a place of respite. But I actually saw it as a really bad sign because it was showing that she was willing to stay in the past and not deal with what was happening in the present. And she wants to exist in this alternate reality. She wants to step away from the typhoon. She wants to step away from Miguel. And she even wants to step away from the reality that her husband is not there. She just doesn't want to deal with anything that she
Yeah.
doesn't like at the moment.
Actually, there's also I wanted to talk about just that's very quick, like all the characters, because we run through the characters. They have different concepts of home.
Hmm.
Like Norma, she thinks home is the family that never was. Maybe Miguel, home was for him the mother trying to break free, freedom maybe his home. And Andrea, home maybe her dreams, something like this. Home cannot be a physical home. It can be tangible, it can be intangible, but it's always a question of home. And even up until the end, even they had their own versions of home, you don't know if they're settled with it. Like it's an ongoing feeling that really crawls deep after the film ends.
Yeah, no, it's like they're trying to, like you mentioned Andrea, like we don't know what's gonna happen with her, and she's staying with these people, and she's saying doing this thing, and it's not the exact thing that she wanted, because she imagined this life in Manila. But I wondered if it was that she realized that she wouldn't necessarily be able to have this, or that she couldn't control that future, so she was going to control her present, which was staying with these
Exactly.
people who worshipped her. And yeah, she had these magical powers. She healed a puppy, and then but
Mm.
she's doing
Or
these
did
things, and
she? Or
but
did
did
she?
but did she? Because I'm like, again, was this real? We don't know.
We don't know.
But
I actually don't know.
you actually don't know, right? That makes sense. But no, it makes sense because it's just like, again, these it could have been that the people saw what they wanted to see, because they were looking for a savior, they were looking for a sign of hope, and they saw her touching this puppy, and they were probably in their minds had like a collective illusion. She healed the puppy, and she ran. She's like, I healed the puppy, and she went along with it, because there is nothing to show that it actually that she did heal the puppy. I just saw that as them interpreting what they
Yeah,
needed at
like
that moment.
it's this kind, like when people look up to something that could actually save them, and they see something regardless if it's true or not, but their reality is somebody is holy or something, then they feel that somebody would actually save them regardless of the situation. So it plays in both ends. It's a win-win for them, but is it really? Because if this reality ends, nothing actually is in concrete situation.
Yeah, and they're
So
not going to be prepared for the fallout. There,
exactly.
that's another fallout that they're not going to be prepared with. So it's like, what kind of disaster is waiting for them too? And then Miguel, talking about disaster. So I want to talk about the final, like this is probably the last one, final 10 minutes of the film. And this part was the one that really shook me, because this is again Norma wanting to see Louis, and she's like, I have to get into the Astrodome, and it's only for people who's injured. And she forces Miguel to injure her. And there was a moment I was talking to the TV. I was legit talking to my laptop, arguing with it, because I was like, dude, what Lee? I'm like, she's your mama, you love her, but walk away. This time, like, just leave her for your
Mhm.
own sanity, because doing what she's asking you to do is gonna again break some part of you. And it's like it's violent, and then it seems like, I know to some people it might seem like he's relishing what's happening, he's really getting into it, but I think that was another moment where he broke too, because he's like, the one person that I have left to depend on, because Andrea's gone, is my mom, and she's doing everything she can to leave me now. She's forcing me to hurt her so that she can leave me. So I want to talk a bit about that scene, and then that scene also is another one where I think the VFX team did a fantastic job, because the sky gets dark, and like for the film they were talking about, there's an impending storm. I'm like, this is the storm. Forget the rain, forget the floods or whatever. This storm, this scene happening with Miguel and Norma, is the actual storm that was being forecasted from the beginning of the film. So I want to talk a bit about that, and I love how they just made it dark,
Yeah,
because that was
it's a very double-edged sword, Like I think with the character of Miguel, that that notion of action towards her mom is basically two emotions. I think it's for the love of her mom. I mean, at the end of the day, she still gives it to her. Like, this is what you want, I give it to you. But I do love you. That's why I'm doing this. But at the same time, like the force of action actually comes from the fact that trying to break free with this chains that the situation is giving him, and then he did. And you know what, like when it happens, you cannot redo it. It's just there. Then you have to live with it. So you know that kind of tension the whole time. He's like, how to say, menacingly contemplating, and then it happens. It's like the storm in what happens during the storm. Like you try to be prepared, because like in my case, like in my hometown, it's always a storm. It's always, we always experience the storm, and it's normal for us, but we weren't prepared for this. you know when you take action and this is what happens, then you have to be responsible for it. But how do you be responsible for it if you don't know what will happen actually? And then just after him bringing the mom to the Astrodome, and then he needs to have a decision, because the boat has actually arrived. So you get this point, like there's no time for you to contemplate or think, because everything is happening at the same time. So what strikes you is what you need to do, but like the feeling is still there. You still want her, but you also want freedom. So for him, maybe he did have freedom, but at the same time, did he really did? Because he left the only home that he knows of for the most time that he was alive, at least.
yeah, and he's approaching an unsure future, because he has no idea what's waiting for him when the boat docks, right? He doesn't know how he'll be treated. He does like his. he has nothing. He only has literally the clothes on his back, and he has no
Mm,
support system. So that's and I think that was actually a really good way to end the film, because like with these kind of situations, whether it's a natural disaster, whether it's the loss that we mentioned, we talked about the loss of like a family member or parent, or like you lose some part of you due to trauma. Every day is unsure. You never know what day is going to be. We never know what the next day is going to bring. Like you and I are talking here right now, and we don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. And like but you have to take a leap of faith. And that's, you're talking about breaking the chains. And that's what Miguel did. He was like, I'm going to have to take this leap of faith and hope that something good happens, because like honestly, you can't, like for his mom, like his mom's supposed to stay stuck in the past, and Miguel realizes that we can't live in the past. We can't keep living in the past. There's gonna come a time where we're gonna have to say, I can't do this anymore. Like you're making things more difficult for me than I need to be. And like, I love you, you're my parent, but I gotta do what is right for me. And that's the most scary thing
yeah.
I think any child could
And
do.
when you take decisions, then you ask like whether the weather is fine, like what would happen after something like this.
Hmm.
It's
Yeah,
always
yeah.
unsure, but you have to be there.
Yeah. And you can have a good clear sky, but then what's happening with you and your family is not it's not that good.
True, true.
I want to talk a bit about the technical aspects of this film, because we talked a bit about the production design, about the creating the world. I want to talk about how you actually went about building this, because I am very fascinated by how you and your team actually built this world. Like, where was the like what was the location scouting like, and like what was it
Uh,
to create this world? Because I'm sure it could have affected them some way.
yeah, it's very hard to say. A very important aspect of the film was world building, actually. More than anything, we had to build it from scratch. A lot of it was set not in my hometown, mainly because of budget constraints, and it's really hard to go. But like there were like non-negotiables of like locations that I really had to do in my hometown, mainly because it was part of the geography, and mainly because it was iconic in terms of like how it was a very, how to say, apparent place for people who were actually hit by the storm. Example, the Astrodome. Yeah, that was a very hard thing to do. At the same time, it was hard for me to actually go back to my hometown after 7 years shooting this with people and extras, with crowd that actually survived the storm. So in a way, it was, I fear that there was also me bringing back the trauma, but also mainly because the people understood what we were trying to do. In a way, this may be dramatic in essence, but in a way, we were trying to tell their story. We were trying to show what could have been other stories that were not told, but also we wanted to celebrate the survival and the resilience of what had happened. So it made me feel better, and then it made me push forth with what really we envisioned for the film. Yeah.
Mhm. And can you tell me, like, you talk about like for the crew, like for anyone that wasn't on crew that saw the film afterwards, like what was the reaction to it? Like, where has it screened apart from TIFF?
It premiered in Locarno Film Festival under the Cineasta del Presente competition. We got the Cinema Giovanti Award. It was a junior jury prize. And then right after Toronto, it will be screening in a few more festivals. Guanajuato, it will be in Chicago in competition, and like Hamburg and a few more. So it has its life now. So yeah.
Yeah, it's gonna have some legs, and I know it's gonna create a lot of discussion. And the thing with this, also with this film, because one thing with TIFF, like when on their platform, it shows you like the countries that are involved in producing these films, and yours has a
Uh,
lot. It's the Philippines, France, Singapore, Indonesia, Germany, and Qatar.
hmm?
How tell me about getting all of these countries, like people from all these countries, involved in like helping you create this story and helping you show it to the world.
I just want to put in context, like in the Philippines, there are lots of festivals that actually funds the films. So they submit a script, and then if they like it, you have to finish it in a couple of months with a very small seed grant. And I really wanted to submit there, and I didn't know about how these co-productions work, working with other countries. But then again, we got into like it's this workshop in Cannes, La Fabrique du Cinéma du Monde, and then that's where the time I actually knew about how co-production works. I mean, like even up until now, I'm still learning, but at least during that time, it was my first foray and exposure into these things. And then I realized for this kind of film, maybe it could work to have much more people involved, mainly because of the scope of the film. So I declined the Philippine grant, which was very low, but I mean it's usually the case. And then even if we met our French producer in La Fabrique, the Singapore co-producers were a good friend of mine. They were co-producers of my past few shorts that actually went to TIFF. I have two more shorts that previously played in TIFF. Um, Qatar was basically a grant from Doha Film Institute. Germany was for World Cinema Fund, and Indonesia was an investor, an investment. So that kind. I mean, we needed all the help we could get. So yeah, it took us like a while, but like I mean, it's there, it's done, and we're happy about how it went. Yeah.
Mm. It all definitely paid off for sure. What can you tell me that you're working on next? Because I just love your mind. I love how your mind makes works, and I love how you're translating story onto screen. This is the first thing that I've ever seen for you. I haven't seen your two other short films. I know one is the Imminent Imminent, and
So,
then the other one is where's I can't remember.
joyless.
Yes, and so I haven't seen those first. I'm my friend that I told about who works for TIFF. She asked me how it was, and I told her I'm like it's weird and good and compelling, and she's like that's like his other films. I'm like I can't wait to watch those because I just like how your mind works, and I think it's great
Mm.
that we have you some from young filmmakers like you because for such a young filmmaker like you have done I think an extremely amazing job with your first feature film because as you said the scope is big and you handle it extremely well.
Yeah. Thank you for that compliment. It really means a lot. I don't know how to transverse this feature filmmaking, even this press thing with Stephen. It's like interviews. How do I do this? No, no, no. But mainly because I think with the time spent of developing the film, if this film could have been shot 7 years ago, it could have been a different film. Mainly because maybe 7 years ago or 6 years ago, I wasn't doing films. I I I I was mainly in the industry as an editor. I've worked with like 50 plus features or more. That's mainly my background. So, and then in between, I just realized what I really wanted to do was directing, but at the same time, I didn't know if I could actually do it. So in between those years, I started making shorts, and then I quite liked it to the point that I feel that shorts actually molds me in a way where slowly I get to learn the kind of cinema that I wanted to make. So I see my process is usually I hyper focus on things where people don't make stories about. Like in a way, it's always the extremes. The let's say the rich and the poor and the middle class. It's nothing usually. But I hyper focus on them, but I don't hyper focus just because they're in the middle. I hyper focus on things that they do, and eventually I make stories around it. And a lot of things, even the tragic ones, I see humor in it because in everyday life there's always humor. So that's how I managed to mix all these elements to a certain point that it becomes a film, something like that. And I'm more concerned about emotions. I know a lot of films, it's more clear in terms of the narrative or what sense, but I do feel like with my films, regardless of if you understand it or like it was clear, more important for me is like it leaves a mark on you. It makes you feel something. I don't know, maybe it makes you angry, it makes you sad, makes you happy, and that's the most important thing for me. It gives you these kinds of emotions here and there. So
It certainly left an impression on me. No, it really did. I think it's probably one of my favorite films from the festival because
thank
um
you.
no, I'm not and I'm being extremely genuine when I say that because I had to remake my whole like top four list. I'm like, oh well, I'll have to change my list now. And you say you talked about being an editor, and I can actually see that in the film because as you said, I was thinking like your scene transitions are clean. Now that I'm thinking about it, like the transitions from your scenes are super clean and there's like nothing very jarring about it. It all just kind of flows really well. So all of that experience definitely played off in that aspect of the film as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you to my directors who has no choice but to work with me. So
I'm sure they were happy.
Yeah, I hope they are. Yeah, they would. I hope. Yeah.
I'm gonna let you go now because I know you have to prepare for other interviews. But I hope you have a fantastic festival season with TIFF and going forward into the other festivals. You said you were nervous about this. Don't be. I think you did really great. So like be happy with what you've done and like just accept all the praise coming your way because I'm sure you're gonna get a whole lot more.
Thank you, Carolyn. Really means a lot with this interview and talking about like very casually about the film. Very nice. Thank you. I hope we get more time, but Stephen is like here.
I know, I see him. So it's okay. No, it's fine. I appreciate all the time you've given me, and congrats to you, your actors. Like again, I ran like she honestly, she was like, "Who? If she was, like, she's perfect for a thriller. If anyone sees her cast in a thriller or horror, she'll be fantastic." David and Chados, they did fantastic again. So like, props to everyone involved.
I'll let her know. I'll let her know.
Yeah, no, she was like, have you seen the Benedict Cumberbatch film, the oh my gosh, The Power of the Dog?
No, I haven't seen that much film here in TIFF.
Yeah, you're probably gonna get to see after if you watch that. I made a comparison between her and there's a character called Cody. When not the
Oh,
actor's no, the actor's name is Cody Smith McPhee, and he plays a character. When you watch this film, watch his character, watch how his character progresses, and then you might see what I'm talking about with what
okay.
she did with Andrea. Because I saw like a similarity with him. I'm like, she's the
Similarity.
most assumingly threatening character I've seen this entire festival.
I'll let you know if I have time. I'll let you know.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you
So
very much, Carolyn.
thank you.